When I planted a tree, my neighbor cut it down in the middle of the night, then sent me an invoice for root damage compensation, $3,900. When I questioned it, he said, "Next time ask permission, peasant." I was too broke to fight it legally until I found his illegal tenants and sent photos to. I woke up one morning to find a gaping hole where my newly planted tree used to be. Not a single leaf remained. Just fresh dirt, torn roots, and a muddy trail leading straight to my neighbor's driveway. At first, I thought maybe an animal dug it up. But then I checked my Ring cam. 3:41 a.m. There he was, Chuck, gray sweatpants, headlamp, a shovel in one hand, a hacksaw in the other. The same guy who stood on his porch just a week earlier, waving at me with that fake Midwest nice smile. The same guy who called my tree a nice touch to the yard just 3 days ago. Now I watched him on camera, dragging my tree like it was trash and tossing it into the back of his pickup truck. My heart was racing. Not because of the tree, it was just a sapling, but because of what came in the mail the next day. A printed invoice from Chuck Realty LLC for $3,900. Reason: root damage compensation. Apparently, he claimed the roots of my 6-week-old maple had cracked the concrete pad of his foundation and posed an imminent threat to his property line integrity. It was completely ridiculous. The tree barely had time to settle in the soil, let alone grow roots deep enough to touch anything. But when I knocked on his door to talk about it, he just laughed. Then he looked me up and down and said, "Next time ask permission, peasant." That word stuck in my head for days. Peasant, like I was beneath him, like I didn't belong in this neighborhood. We both lived in Lakeville, Minnesota, a quiet suburb just 30 minutes outside Minneapolis. Safe, peaceful, middle class, the kind of place where folks mow their lawns every Sunday and wave to passing cars whether they know you or not. I bought this little single-level ranch home after my divorce, paid for it myself. It wasn't big or fancy, but it was mine. Chuck moved in 6 months ago, and from the start, something was just off. He always had a smug air. Like the rest of us were lucky he chose to live here. His driveway constantly had luxury cars parked outside, despite him claiming he worked remotely in logistics. And his trash bins overflowed every week, way more than a single guy should have. Still, I let it go. Until the tree, until that invoice, and until I found out what he was really hiding. It started with a noise. Late one Saturday, I was taking out my recycling when I heard muffled music coming from Chuck's basement. Then a voice, 2 voices, a woman laughing, then footsteps. I looked up and saw lights flicker behind one of his ground-level windows. It didn't click at first, but over the next few weeks, I started noticing more clues. Different people walking up his side yard at night with backpacks. A guy grilling behind his fence at 10 p.m. Uber Eats drivers dropping food at the basement door. That's when I knew he was renting out his basement, probably cash only, definitely not on the books. And Lakeville has strict zoning laws about that. You can't rent out a separate unit unless it meets a dozen building codes, emergency exits, ventilation, fireproofing, permits. Chuck didn't have any of that. I was still angry about the tree, the invoice, and especially that word, peasant, so I started documenting everything. Photos, videos, license plates, screenshots from the camera I had pointed toward the fence. Then I sent it all in. To the Lakeville Zoning Department, to the IRS tip line, and just to twist the knife a little deeper, I sent a copy to his homeowners association. And that's where things started to get really interesting. Backhand index pointing right, quick question. What would you have done if your neighbor chopped down your tree in the middle of the night? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy revenge stories like this. The first sign something was up came 3 weeks later. I pulled into my driveway after work and saw a city inspector's car parked out front of Chuck's place. Clipboard, hard hat, measuring tape. I watched from my window as he walked around the property, scribbled notes, and eventually knocked on the front door. Chuck answered with his usual smug grin. But it didn't last long. I couldn't hear what was said, but the look on Chuck's face went from cocky to cornered in about 10 seconds. The next day, 2 more official-looking vehicles showed up. One was from the city again, the other, code enforcement. They stayed for over an hour. After that, Chuck's property went quiet. No more midnight barbecues, no more strangers walking down the side yard, no more Uber Eats. But the real fireworks started a week later. Chuck got fined. I know because the city posts citations online. $9,200 for zoning violations. And that was just the beginning. Because the IRS also came knocking. Apparently, Chuck hadn't reported a single dollar of rental income. For over a year, they launched a full audit. From what I gathered through the grapevine and a mutual neighbor who works in the city clerk's office, Chuck was facing serious back taxes, penalties, and possible fraud charges. His rental unit was condemned, and his little real estate side hustle, dead. But I wasn't done yet, because Chuck had cost me more than just a tree. He tried to humiliate me, scare me, make me feel powerless, so I did what he never expected. I got creative. I started by revisiting that fake invoice he sent me, the one demanding $3,900 for root damage. It was printed on letterhead from Chuck Realty LLC, complete with a cheesy gold logo and a P.O. box in town. But here's the thing, I couldn't find any record of Chuck Realty LLC being an actual registered business in Minnesota. So I looked deeper. No business license. No state registration. No tax ID. Just a made-up company name slapped on an invoice to make it look official. I took that information and added it to a new folder on my desktop. Chuck, fraud evidence. Then I did something I probably should have done a long time ago. I called my cousin Al. He's not a lawyer, but he used to be a paralegal in Minneapolis before moving to Denver. Smart guy. Knows how to poke holes in scams. I told him everything: tree, invoice, illegal rentals, fines, and the LLC that wasn't real. He laughed, then said, "Send me everything. Let me make some calls." By the next morning, Al had looped in an attorney friend of his who specialized in small claims disputes and landlord fraud. Her advice: sue him, not for the tree. That would cost more than it's worth in court fees. But for harassment, fraudulent invoicing, and property damage. Even better, Al told me to file a formal complaint with the state's Department of Commerce. Turns out, using a fake LLC to intimidate someone into paying you money could be considered attempted wire fraud if any communication happened over email or text. Which it did. Chuck had emailed me that bogus invoice and followed up with a text saying, "Don't make me take this to collections." So I filed the complaint. A week later, Chuck got served. The look on his face when the process server walked up to his porch in broad daylight? Priceless. But I wasn't finished. I took that original Ring cam footage of him stealing my tree, plus the footage of all the illegal tenants and traffic coming to his basement door, and put together a neat little video. Nothing dramatic, just facts, timestamps, clear labels. Then I sent it to our HOA board president with a subject line that said, "Illegal activity at 1847 Finch Trail, evidence attached." Within a week, Chuck was summoned to an emergency HOA hearing. He showed up in a wrinkled blazer and tried to charm his way out of it. Didn't work. He was fined for multiple violations of HOA rules, unauthorized construction, unapproved business activity, and conduct detrimental to neighborhood integrity. Total fines, $6,000. But the final nail in his coffin came from his mortgage lender. Apparently, Chuck had refinanced the house earlier that year and claimed he lived alone and used the property as a primary residence. Once the IRS flagged his rental income and the city labeled part of the house uninhabitable, his mortgage terms got voided. They jacked up his rate, demanded an immediate review, and 2 months later, foreclosure notice. Chuck tried to fight it. He called the HOA board corrupt, tried to bully the zoning department with a lawyer who never showed up to court, even left a passive-aggressive note in my mailbox that said, "Congrats on ruining a man's life over a damn tree." But I didn't ruin his life. He did. I just made sure the right people saw it. And when the for sale sign finally went up on his lawn, I opened a bottle of wine and toasted my tree. But here's the best part. 2 weeks after Chuck moved out, I got a knock at my door. It was one of the guys who used to live in Chuck's basement. His name was Kyle. Early 30s, worked nights at a local factory. He had no idea what Chuck was doing was illegal. Said he just needed a cheap place after his divorce. He handed me a small plant in a pot, a red maple sapling. Said, "Thought maybe you'd want to try again. On your terms this time." I planted that tree in the exact same spot. It's growing strong. Chuck may have left the neighborhood, but his mess stuck around for months. The house sat empty, grass overgrown, mail piling up, a real eyesore. HOA tried to get the bank to maintain it, but foreclosure properties move slow. Meanwhile, I kept getting calls from lawyers and investigators with follow-up questions about Chuck's activities, both financial and residential. Apparently, my complaint to the Department of Commerce had triggered a wider investigation. See, Chuck didn't just fake one LLC. He had three, all with slightly different names. Chuck Realty LLC, CR Holdings, Upper Midwest Investment Group. None were real. All had been used on phony invoices, questionable lease agreements, and even some forged receipts for home repairs that never happened. According to one of the agents I spoke with, Chuck had been padding property expenses and writing them off as business losses for years. It was a small-time tax evasion scam, but across multiple properties. And I wasn't the only one he messed with. Turns out, Chuck used to live in Brooklyn Park before moving to Lakeville. Same pattern. Illegal rentals, bogus charges, threats disguised as business letters. That's when I realized this man had been pulling the same peasant routine on people for years. He counted on folks being too broke, too intimidated, or too tired to fight back. Well, not this time. A few months later, I got a call from someone representing a class action suit. A group of former tenants, neighbors, and contractors were teaming up to sue Chuck for damages tied to his fake businesses and fraudulent activity. They wanted me to join. I said yes. And while the legal process was slow, it gave me a certain satisfaction to know he wouldn't be able to run the same scam again. One day, while walking my dog, I saw a young couple looking at Chuck's old house with a real estate agent. They looked a little nervous, so I walked up, introduced myself, and offered the truth. Not just about the house, but the neighborhood, too. We keep to ourselves, I said, but we look out for each other when it matters. They ended up buying the place, moved in that fall, even invited me over for a backyard barbecue once they settled in. The new owner, Mark, works in HVAC. His wife, Renee, teaches 3rd grade. Good people. Funny enough, Mark noticed the tree right away. Nice maple, he said. Did you plant that? I smiled. Yep, and this time it's here to stay. But the story doesn't quite end there. About a year later, I got a letter in the mail from a P.O. box in Wisconsin, no return name. Inside was a single piece of paper, typed, "I underestimated you, you'll get yours eventually." No signature, no postmark. I knew who it was from, Chuck, still trying to act like he was in control, still tossing empty threats from a distance. But it didn't scare me. I framed the letter and hung it in my garage right above my toolbox. A reminder of what happens when you push the wrong peasant.